All right. Are we live? There we go. All right. Welcome to Old School for Newbies. I am Shay, or frillSquid, and I'm going to be your presenter for today. So here's our table of contents. All of this will be on the final, which is 100% of your grade, so you better cram good. So, my name's Shay, or frillSquid. I use they, them pronouns. My major social media is a blog because I'm 7,000 years old. I've been an active Lolita for a grand total of 7 years. I actually celebrated my bodyline anniversary just a week or two ago. My main styles are old school sweet, punk, and oji, and I am very enthusiastic about cotton because it don't stink. Back in college, I took Japanese 101 just to help with YJ auctions navigation because I really wanted to get those deals. And according to my blog and this panel, I am the self-declared arbiter of taste. That's not a literal expression. I don't think I have good taste, but for the purposes of this panel, it will be my opinions you're learning, and that's excellent. So first of all, is old school, because it is a time period. So old school takes place after Proto-Lolita, before the 2008 print boom. So roughly 1997 is when these tropes in Lolita became codified. And then 2005 is when things started to move past this kind of aesthetic. That's when you see a lot of the inclusion of different types of lace and materials and colors you don't see in the prototypical old school. Old school Lolita is associated with several different types of media, namely GLBs, fruits, Kara, other magazines, and lots of street snaps, as well as post-model photos. Old school is also associated with the live journal days in the Western Com, and although the time period for old school was 1997 to 2005, you can still see a lot of brands making the same sort of style today. It's just not the dominant mode of Lolita. So here are some myths that we're gonna bust through with no explosions. First of all, myth, old school is a substyle. This is incorrect. Old school is an era of Lolita in which certain characteristics are present, but it can be applied to any substyle. You can have Gothic old school, like old short moitié. You can have sweet old school, like what I'm wearing. And classic old school looks very streamlined and also comes in like 90 centimeter bust maximums. So there's a ton of different options due to the fact that it is not a substyle. The second one is everyone who wears old school is a lifestyle old schooler. I can speak English. That's wrong. It is just clothes. Tomorrow I'm going to go back to work in my khakis and be miserable again. Anyone can wear old school as part of their Lolita experience or the whole thing. Another myth is that only certain people can wear old school. This is specifically relating to how sizing was smaller and there was less diversity and less multiple size availability back in the late 90s and early 2000s. This does make it more difficult, but just because you see a certain type of person stereotypically doesn't mean it's limited like that. Anyone can wear old school. Another idea is only actual pieces from the old school period count as old school, otherwise it's just traditional. This is nonsense. First of all, there are more people in Lolita now than ever, so if we only limited old school to actual old items, we would run out of old school. And second of all, if it's the exact same items, techniques, and styles, then there's no functional difference other than it probably smells a little better. And the last and biggest myth is old school has to look straight out of the GLB. That is, old school has a certain very polished look and every coordinate has to match up with that. Okay, why is old school? Old school is because old school just means an older type of Lolita, so you can look however you want as long as you keep that spirit of 1997 to 2005 with you. All right, moving on. four main substyles for old school. 3.5 are Gothic Lolita, the one with the most aesthetic continuity. Gothic Lolita rose both out of Lolita and Goth and has heavy connections with Visual K and the band girl scene associated with that, especially in this time. Sweet Lolita, this is the one that's changed the most. You have the classic black and white look, plaid old school looks, the red confection I'm wearing today. A lot of things that people just see as old school now were actually considered sweet then. You also get a lot of strawberry motifs there for some reason. Classic is a mixture of historical inspiration and experimentation, lots of florals. The silhouette for classic was less established then, so you see a lot of things like Victorian Maiden did mermaid skirts for a while, or you see very long lengths and very short lengths. It's kind of a more mixed bag than it is today, and you don't see any of those painting prints that have become so stereotypical. And punk is pretty rare now and was pretty rare back then, and honestly, it's not really great for newbies because all of the main punk brands are dead, and the ones that are alive are really hard to filter through. So I'm going to be focusing on punk the least, but you can't see my punk Lolita 101 panel if you're interested in that. So here are some pictures of what Gothic looked like. They look pretty much like Gothic Lolita because that's what they are. The one over here is more of an elegant Gothic aristocrat coordinate, but you see a lot of things that have good continuity, like you see the platforms, you see some net tights, you see lots of playing around with texture, you have the shiny fabric over here and the velvets from this, and you see some interesting hairstyles. It's not all ringlets. For Sweet, here are 3 images with very different pictures that could all be considered sweet. You have this plaid look, which might be considered sweet, might be considered punk if you don't know what's up, but it's definitely got a very cutesy vibe to it, from the bubble toe kind of sort of rocking horseshoes to the scalloped hem here up to the cute twin tails. Over here in the middle is something that would be like considered old school without a qualifier of sweet, Gothic, or classic if you didn't know that substyles were a thing. But you can see it's very sweet. You have a very frilly hat here. You have these cute boots that are hard to see. And of course, this baby bag is iconic, and please give it to me. This is more in line with modern sweet. I believe this is an Angelic pretty coordinate. You have strawberries, pink overload, and everything is very matchy-matchy. And over on the right here, you have a Shiro coordinate, which is just old school talk for it's all white. And it's also kind of on the sweet side, but it's a little classic because it is a metamorphose coordinate. All right, on to the last one. This is a Mary Magdalene ad. You can see that there's a very streamlined look to it. Mary Magdalene ads had a lot of this poofy hair. You have a funny, like, small kind of fascinator hat. These heels aren't what would be considered Lolita today, but obviously Mary Magdalene is the authority for Lolita then, so I'll trust them at that. And this dress is interesting because it uses a floral or berry print. I'm not quite sure, but it's layered over this kind of translucent ruffle with a very streamlined silhouette. Over here is the Victorian Maiden mermaid skirt I was talking about. You have these short lengths, you have long lengths, you have square necklines. There's really a ton of variability in classic Lolita of this time period that really, some of it has been lost, and it's really sad, and I cry every time. So this is some punk Lolita stuff. Again, I'm not going to go too in depth about it, but you can see there's a prevalence of either mini hats or no headwear at all. There's asymmetric designs here. It's a little more revealing. You tend to see JSKs without any blouse. And in general, it takes cues both from punk and from Lolita, not just from one or the other. It's more of a crossover between styles than a subcategory of Lolita as the other substyles are. So Lolita Culture, from 1977 to 1998, Takeshitadori in Harajuku was designated a pedestrian paradise. Basically, they said, go away to every single car ever. And it was great. And people would meet there on Sunday, show off, dance together, and just enjoy themselves. And that's where a lot of the in-person Lolita culture that wasn't from bands and concerts came from. Bands were available either in person or for domestic shipping. However, there really wasn't a huge availability, so people did a lot of handmade. The fashion stemmed from handmade rather than from on top some kind of hierarchical trend maker, as many fashions in conventional ways do. So outside of Japan, because there was really no in-person opportunities, it was pretty much LiveJournal and other social media, GeoCities, heck, even Gaia Online, where people would congregate in 97 through 2005. You'd be more likely to see Lolitas at an anime convention than anywhere else. There weren't really the established Lolita conventions or Lolita events that there are today. Brand was very scarce, if at all available. Metamorphose was the first brand to ship overseas, but even then, it was very hard to find brand. And a lot of indie brands opened because A, people couldn't get brand. B, there were some amazingly talented people in the Western community who wanted to contribute. And C, the brand that they could get wasn't sized for the diverse population outside of Japan. So Blasphemy's Closet is like one of the quintessential old school brands. And if I ever see a piece from them, I will be very happy. All right, old school and lifestyling, this I touched on earlier. It's the same, it's just closed versus Lolita's Must Be Lovely's disagreement, which seems a little silly now. I mean, it's clothes. You can go on Bodyline or Double Inspired and buy a whole wardrobe for less than it costs for a used 2012 Toyota Camry. However, when people couldn't get brand or Lolita as easily as they can now, when you had to know somebody who knows somebody in Japan, or you had to sew it yourself, putting in these lifestyle things for when you couldn't be Lolita was a really great way for people to feel like they were part of the community and the aesthetic. So on the right, I have from GLB9 a page of recipes and DIY stuff that you could do to make your life a little more Lolita, even when you couldn't be. So the lifestyling was highly focused on Lolita hobbies like making things, embroidery, knitting, crocheting, sewing, etiquette and presentation, just the idea of Lolita as an identity rather than Lolita as a style, which is very complex, and I could do a whole panel on it, but we're 13 minutes in and I'm gonna keep on going. So the materials for old school Lolita are a subset of the currently available materials, but you have to be more aware of them because there are some things that you look at it and you're like, dang, so close, but not old school. So first of all, lace. The main types of lace you'll see in old school are torchon or bobbin lace, which is made from tiny threads braided together. It's often called crochet lace as well, but it's not actually crocheted. It's more of a weird weaving knitting machine type thing. There's also chemical lace or Venice lace, which I have some on the end of my detachable sleeve here. That's made by an embroidery machine embroidering on top of a stabilizer, which is then washed away, leaving only the embroidery. Eyelet lace, I don't think I have any on me right now, but that's basically a plain weave cotton where eyelets, little holes are cut out of it and then sewn around the little holes to make a design. Meta and some other brands like Marble, Visible, Kazuko, Gawa, but there were occasionally Rachel lace, which is a type of lace that's woven on a machine, not quite like torchon lace. It's a little rougher and has more complex designs, but it's Very difficult to find high quality rational lace. Rational lace is often very plasticky, so I would say if you want rational lace, just get it from Meta. Tulle lace, which is the main type of embroidered tulle lace that you see for modern custom laces and on modern Lolita pieces, just does not work. So fabrics, you would have plain weave or twill weave cotton. I'm wearing a plain weave for these sleeves, and the dress itself is twill weave, which means it has diagonal lines in the weave due to the offset of it. There's also tapestry weave or gobelins, which were typically florals. And then there's cotton velveteen, which is just what you call velvet when it's made out of cotton instead of another fiber. But a lot of times on Taobao and for a lot of other brands, Angelic Pretty is big on this. You see a lot of polyester and sheer fabrics in modern releases. Those weren't really popular. Polyester hadn't made as big of an impact yet, and there was more of a focus on homemade and homespun feeling things, and polyester just really didn't suit that. So prints, you don't see as many border prints. I'm wearing the Chess Alice print, the 2008 re-release of the 2002 release, which was one of the earliest custom prints from a Lolita brand, but most of your prints you're going to see are all over prints and prints with kind of standard or commercially available motifs, such as florals, cherries, strawberries, or plaid. You also see some screen printing on other fabrics, or you can also see some appliques. So let's just quickly go through the materials visually. So up here we have some rational lace from a current Meta sock release. This is eyelid lace over here. This is part of an Innocent World chemical lace headdress. In the middle, you can see that rose chemical lace. Here's some torchon bobbin or crochet lace. You can see it's kind of delicate, but it's very good because you can bleach the heck out of these guys and they're not going to do anything. And over here with a big crossed out sign through it, we have some tulle lace socks by Angelic Pretty. Do not wear these for old school, even though they're super cute, because it just will not fit. Over here, you can see in this twill weave, you have some diagonal lines in it. This is a velveteen. You can see how soft it feels. This is a tapestry weave. Notice how instead of being printed on the top of the smooth fabric, the actual colors are woven into the fabric. And over here is just a plain weave. This one isn't Lolita quality, but I chose it so that you could clearly see the lines crossing over each other. And this chiffon over here is just too translucent to suit old school most of the time. And here are some prints. We have a cute strawberry print. We have screen printed roses on this Metamorphose skirt. And we have this plaid, which plaid can either be woven into the yarn or it can be printed. But, you know, this one is printed because you can see that it's blank on the other side. Over here, we have a commercially available border print. These really weren't big until 2008, so I would avoid that. All right, outfit anatomy, our juicy part of actually getting dressed. You have the main piece, the blouse, the hair accessory, the legwear. I'm not going to show you my legs, the shoes, petticoat and bloomers, jewelry bags, hairstyles, and accessories, and then how you present yourself, the styling with the hair and the makeup. All right, so for your main piece is going to be either a one piece, which is a sleeve dress, a jumper skirt, JSK, or a skirt, SK. Although currently a lot of brands release mostly jumper skirts and then maybe an OP or a skirt for every 2 jumper skirts, there was a more even mix of types of pieces back then, with skirts enjoying just as much prominence as OPs and jumper skirts. So skirts are often easier to find and cheaper for old school. OPs were sometimes worn with blouses, normally because an OP has sleeves. In current Lolita, you don't wear it with a blouse, but even though these are detachable sleeves, it's to give the effect of wearing a short sleeve dress with a blouse underneath. Silhouettes varied. You had longer T-length pieces, you had very short pieces like some of the moitié stuff, but most of all, you really just didn't have that enormous Angelic Pretty poof that you tend to see later on. All right, moving on. We have our blouses and cutsos. These are tops. Unlike the main pieces, which could come in a wide variety of colors, you really only saw black, white, red, pink. There weren't as many varieties in blouse color. You couldn't just hop on Taobao and get a minty teal blouse for $10. So blouses had either short sleeves. This is a winter spread, so it doesn't have any short sleeves that I can see. It could have long sleeves, or you could have detachable sleeves where you'd have a short puff sleeve blouse, and then there are 4 buttons on each sleeve where you can take them off. These are really convenient and great if you have a small wardrobe. Blouses were overwhelmingly just solid plain weave cotton. They were not translucent, and that makes them really, really great for if you want to wear skirts and dresses interchangeably, because it means your blouses work for everything. Cutsos are the open secret that people don't talk about enough. You can have cutsos. First of all, they're made of knit cotton usually. You can have cutsos that are more tight-fitted and have more details so that they're more like blouses. Or you can have cutsos that are essentially t-shirts with the Lolita brand name on them. Cutsos are nice because they're very casual, but they also look a little bit dressy. And because you can wash them easily, they're great to wear with skirts. And for hair accessories, you have the classic rectangle maxi pad headdress. You have a round headdress or canotier, which I affectionately call head doilies. You have full-size hats, mini crowns, full bonnets, which are kind of mob cap-like because they have a cap over the back of your head and a little ruffle on the front, and then half bonnets that are just a headband. Currently, you see these kind of like quarter bonnets, which are kind of like a rectangle headdress, but with a bigger frill in front and less at the back. But in old school Lolita, you really don't see that. You also see fewer of the dramatic and novelty pieces, and you don't see quite so many berets in old school. Hair accessories were usually in standard prints or solid colors. Because there weren't the border prints and the custom print fabrics, you really don't see having the exact printed polka dot of the top half of your skirt on your headdress. So that makes them both easier to coordinate because you can put them with anything, and harder to coordinate because old school colors and Lolita colors in general will never ever match. Moving on to your outfit anatomy for your tights and socks. So tights were generally solids or fishnets or lace. Custom printed tights weren't really big because of cost effectiveness back then. Socks you can have over the knee, under the knee, ankle length. The classic old school sock, which is up here, is your lace-topped socks. You could have socks with a little embroidery on the top, plain socks, striped socks. After 2003, you start seeing some knitted patterns, like modern innocent world socks, but in general, a plain lace-topped sock is going to go with pretty much everything, and a nice striped sock will go with everything that the plain sock doesn't go with. Honestly, legwear was a lot more difficult to come by in different colors. Here you see the grand color range of 5 different colors for this. So a lot of times you would just see white or black with any other color, even if it didn't strictly match. Shoes. Shoes also are interesting because the infamous tea parties that Angelic Pretty is famous for just had not come out back then. They weren't around until later. So the main Lolita types of shoes back then were platform shoes of all sorts. Shoes had flat soles mostly and rounder pointed toes. You had Mary Janes, which have a closed front and a strap across the middle, and you had a lot fewer colors. So a lot of times you might see a cord that was all blue and white on top, but with black shoes because nobody was making blue shoes back then. This is important to keep in mind, both because if you want to be historically accurate to like 20 years ago, or if you just really don't want to have to buy a matching pair of shoes for every main piece you own, I highly recommend picking up a pair of school uniform Mary Janes and just having at it. All right. Petticoats were the same shapes as today, but generally worse. They were less poofy, less widely available. You could not pop on Aurora and Ariel and get a wonderfully poofy petticoat for $20 or your money back. Bloomers could be long or they could be short. There's this misconception that peaking bloomers, when you have long bloomers coming out under a short dress, were very common. They were not uncommon. They were a little uncommon, but they definitely existed. But it's really not a necessity to have perfect peaking bloomers for every coordinate. Bloomers typically had torchon or eyelid lace on the hem. Sometimes they were plain, but a lot of times a way you can quickly rule out a pair of bloomers for old school is if it has tulle or net lace on the hem, it's not going to work. All right, moving on. For your accessories and jewelry, most of it was made of metal. Sweets jewelry really wasn't a thing until later on. Realistic sweets plastic jewelry wasn't a thing, so stick to metal. Cotton lace wrist cuffs weren't uncommon, but they were by no means a necessity. Really, a lot of vintage jewelry, a lot of punk jewelry from brands like Vivienne Westwood or Gothic jewelry from Alchemy Gothic was pretty popular back then because there was no Lolita jewelry market when people were just starting out in Lolita. And bags, you don't see novelty bags. You do see some stuffed animal bags over here, but the Usakumia, the original Usakumia looked like more of a terrifying monstrosity than a modern Usakumia. So keep that in mind when you're shopping for your small monstrosities. Some people would just carry teddy bears around. That's valid, but I don't do that. If you go ahead with a simple pleather bag, a ruffled tote, or just a tapestry bag, or something you stole from your grandmother, those are all great, great options for old school. Parasols were pretty cool back then. I mean, if you read Tamakaze Girls, Momoko is down with the parasol. They're also great if you don't like getting sunburn, and they make an impromptu weapon if you're into that. Moving on to styling. Simple makeup was the way back then, not because nobody wanted it, but because Japanese makeup has always been pretty simple, and especially in the 2000s, the most you'll see is a little bit of shiny lip gloss and a little bit of smoky eyeshadow, nothing big. I like this image because it looks like she is a cyclops, and I respect that immensely. So hairstyles, you have the hime cut, which is stepped bangs. You have black bangs in front, then a step of bangs that goes on your cheek, and then long hair in the back. You can also have ringlets like over here, affectionately known as sausage curls. This is the archetypal old school style, but not required. And people really didn't do wigs a lot back then, unless it was for ringlet purposes. So if your hair is super short, buzzed down, use it for old school. If your hair is down to your butt and keeps on getting caught underneath your dress while you sit on it, use it for old school. You can't fit a wig on top of that anyway. Really, any natural hair, whether you have it dyed or your natural color, works fine for old school as long as you keep in mind that it is a living fashion style and you're not dressing it up with a wig for a costume. All right, sizing and accessibility. This is a little bit of a tender topic because it kind of sucked back then. Most old school items were made for a very petite audience. The skirt waists were often between 22 and 27 inches, 58 and 70 centimeters, sometimes even smaller. And that really does not match up with the average sizes of anyone in any country anymore. The length is typically designed for shorter people, so typical lengths would look short on people above 5'5" or 165 centimeters, to the point where people recommended that tall Lolitas should wear an underskirt with everything, regardless of whether it fit. This is not good advice. Wear what makes you comfortable. Shirring and elastic, so there was a greater if you don't know what shirring is, it's when elastic is gathered around a piece to give it more flexibility in size and also give it a cute ruffled effect. Most pieces back then weren't shirred, but there were a good amount of full shirred pieces where the shirring goes all around the bodice, which seems good for plus size accessibility, except the shirring is easy to stretch out near the maximum measurements, and at that point it just feels like somebody is sticking a cheese wire in your chest, and that's just not very polite. So there were also different skirt lengths back then, although you see mostly the around the knee length. Just like today, there are T-length skirts. There's that weird mermaid skirt. Moitié has EGA skirts that went almost to the ground. There are all sorts of different lengths. Meta, Innocent World, and Moitié particularly were known to have offered things in both mini length and medium length. For Meta, I believe it was 50 centimeters and 60 centimeters for Innocent World. And just Moitié had a whole variety of lengths. Still slim fitting, but very, very nice way to get the same print, but in a length that suits people of a different height. All right, so for sizing and accessibility, the most important things for you as a student of Lolita to know are your measurements. No matter what you're ordering online, whether it's a pair of tights, a blouse, I don't know, a life vest, if you know your measurements, it'll fit better. And if it fits better, you will be happier about it. This also applies when you're ordering custom sized items. A lot of brands that are suitable for old school are smaller brands and will offer custom size. And if you know your measurements accurately, they will give you a perfectly fitted piece just for your measurements if you give them the right measurements. Shirring, like I said, full shirring looks great until the maximum size. You can also look at pieces that have shirring in the back, partial shirring or half shirring. And if they're a little bit tight with the shirring maxed out, you don't need that shirring anymore. You can just put a fake corset lace over top, take that elastic out, and you will be golden. Moving on, so buying secondhand. Buying secondhand is the default suggestion, but it's a little bit difficult because there is a finite and dwindling supply of clothing from 15 to 24 years ago. We cannot make more clothing back then without a time machine. So where you're going to go for secondhand clothing are resellers like Closet Child. Violet Blue is a favorite of mine. It's smaller than Closet Child, but it gets a lot of funky, weird, punk, old school stuff. Wonderwell, which is more expensive, but if there's a place that's going to have your dream dress for about $50 more than you'd reasonably pay, it's Wonderwell. And Tokyo Alice is very good for punk, gothic, and offbeat stuff, just like Violet Blue. You can also buy secondhand from direct sale sites like Japanese Mercari and Frill and PayPay auctions, where you are directly interacting with a individual Lolita from Japan. You're going to need a shopping service for this. The Buying from Lolita panel has excellent information on that. There's Xianyu, which is the Taobao service that does direct secondhand sales. There's English non-specialized secondhand sites like eBay and Poshmark and Depop, where, again, you're buying directly from somebody. Lace Market is a godsend. It is the big innovation in secondhand Lolita. Basically, Lolita eBay. If you don't have an account now, what are you doing with your life? Go ahead and make a Lace Market account while I'm talking. And the final and I think greatest resource that we've lost since the Panini is the local com swap meet option. Basically, your local community will meet up and people will be like, I hate this old school item. It is haunting me and my closet, taking up room in the house and scaring away all the cattle. And you'll be like, I will take that off your hands for a sweet $20. And that's how you build a wardrobe. It's also great because people always have stories and histories to share about the pieces that they're selling. It's never just, I bought this, I don't want it. It's always, where did you get it from? What does it make you feel? Why did you buy it? There's always a story that you don't see behind any secondhand piece. And at a local com swap meet, you get to see and feel those stories. All right. buying new, you can buy from Japanese brands, a lot of which offer worldwide shipping, but sometimes you will need a shopping service. You can buy from independent Chinese brands on Taobao. Those you'll definitely need a shopping service for. And then there's indie brands worldwide. So there are a whole bunch of brands that I'm going to go through. I'm not going to go through each and every brand because I only have another 25 minutes, but we'll try our best. So these are closed, or in the case of Atelier Buzz brands, almost closed brands that you're going to keep an eye out for auction. So Atelier Buzz and BPN are Gothic brands. Peace Now is the punk line of BPN. So those you'll look for if you like darker styles. Cornet, Shotgun Wedding, Grouse, all different brands of the same people. Those are good for Sweet Lolita. Angelic was a classic Gothic corset-oriented, very elegant brand that sadly shut down. If you're small and you like corsets, keep an eye out for that. Heart E was a beautiful sweet brand that also did some casual stuff. And Putumayo, one of the loves of my life, was the brand in Punk Lolita and had some great sizing flexibility, but very short skirts. So keep those in mind while you're trawling the auctions or the lace markets or, I don't know, eBay, if ye be of great bravery. So brands in Japan that are currently open: Antique Beast, Gothic, Angelic Pretty, Sweet, Atelier Buzz, Gothic but only kind of open, Atelier Pierrot, Gothic and classic and super plus size inclusive. I highly recommend them. Baby Starshine Bright is in bold because they're very good for old school. They sell a lot of their baby classical series, which is re-releases from 20 plus years ago usually. They're excellent. They're just like old school, except you can get them new. Bodyline is often recommended to people starting out in any type of Lolita. Don't do it. It's not worth it anymore. It wasn't really worth it in the first place. Choco Chip Cookies still sells some wonderful jumper skirts and OPs in old school style, but their sizing is a little limited. Emily Temple Cute is Otome, but they did sell some old school sweet suitable stuff. Innocent World, classic. Their socks and tights are pretty size flexible. They do some sweet classic leaning stuff, and they've done a couple releases of older items from like 2005 that are just exquisite. Jane Marple is a long story, but basically Otome. Moving on, Marble and Visible are the lace monster Gothic nightmares of your dreams, and if you're into being called an Ida, go for it. Mary Magdalene, very small sizing, and I'm not sure if they're really open, but good for classic. Maxissimam comes highly recommended, both because they keep on making their old school items from like 15, 20 years ago, and because they have their lovely line, which is plus size friendly as heck. I love them. Meta is also plus size friendly and also re-releases older things. Miho Matsuda is Gothic. Milk is kind of funky Otome kind of thing. Mille Fleur and Mille Noir are just classic and Gothic lines of the same brand, respectively. Mem Moitié is Monasama's iconic Gothic brand, and they don't really do a lot of old school stuff, but they have some accessories that make me feel nostalgic. Physical Drop is former meta designer Kato-san's personal brand, and it's really great stuff. Lovely long silhouettes, very intricate details, but it doesn't look over the top. Pina Sweet collection is also pretty good for old school stuff, though it is not very size inclusive. Sheglet is good for old school Gothic, and Victorian Maiden is good for old school classic. And now here are all the Taobao brands. I'm not going through all of them because Chinese brands are amazing, and I just do not have time to give them justice. So I'll only go over the bolded ones. Dark Star Island does some very interesting blouses. Doll's Party does blouses and cutsos I like. So does Forest Rabbit. HMHM gives you some of that Gothic and classic feel that you get from older old school stuff. Ichigo 15, all custom sizing, some very nice cotton items. Moving on, Lace Garden is mostly Gothic. Miss Mary, incredible blouses there. Sibylla Hase is known both for having some lovely old school styled jumper skirts and one pieces, and for their release of a denim jumper skirt, though Maximum has also done a denim jumper skirt, so you're not alone, Sybil Heisei. Surface Spell is an old Gothic brand. They've been trucking along for a long time, and they have lovely textures and embroideries. And Wanyan in Summer Fashion Studio does mostly bloomers. They're nice bloomers, though. And finally, in our brand section for clothing brands, here's our international brand section. Anna House does custom sized and mostly old school styles. They're lovely and they've been forever. Belladonna is very good for masks and other things, and they do a fair amount of custom. The Black Ribbon has these lovely socks. Deshmo has a variety of things and pretty good sizing. Kuroshiro Kawaii isn't bolded because it's a retailer and not its own brand, but if you're in Texas, they have a place where you can go in and try on items, including items from Metamorphose, so I highly recommend that. Over here are 3 recommended, well, especially recommended items here are from Rose Red Memorandum, which is one of the brands that's uniquely and solely focused on old school styling, almost exclusively. So definitely give that a try, even if all you're doing is looking at their pieces for inspiration, because they do have a lot of fun and they really love the style. Shiroi Tsubasa, or White Wings, is an Etsy shop that does old school Gothic stuff and a little bit of old school Swede. And Summer Tales Boutique's Nostalgia line is really excellent. Violet Fane released a Cotton Basics line recently, but they're not bolted because they sold out in -5 seconds. All right, for accessories and wigs, Alchemy Gothic is a UK-based Gothic brand. Dominum Gloria is a Chinese Gothic brand. La Louise has these bunny bags, which are iconic. Rococo Heroine has headdresses. Rose of Sharon is classic. Rose Thorn has a bit of everything, but mostly Gothic. Spica, if you ever want some horrible plaid mini hats, Spica has got your back. Trendy has legwear. Vivienne Westwood is a punk brand and not a Lolita brand. Vivienne Westwood was the iconic force that brought punk into mainstream fashion, but Viv Westwood jewelry was very popular as a kind of status symbol for 90s Lolitas, and I do have a pair of earrings for the clout, so give them a shot. And Whale Island just has some great parasols. For wigs, if you want a ringlet wig, you can go to Delau Home, Dreamholic, or Maple Wig. Maple Wig is the classic Japanese brand that a lot of the wigs in the GLB actually are from Maple, I'm pretty sure, so that's a big one. The other 2 have thinner, more modern styled wigs, but still have really great ringlets for if you would just want that old school look. All right, and here are brands for shoes. Antina does custom, Boating Game Shoe Shop, Lolita Kingdom, My Shoe Shop, and Seventh Sense all do some platformy things. If you're in the US or the UK, Demonia and Doc Martens are really good options. A lot of the older shoes are Demonias or Doc Martens, and they're great, especially Doc Martens, because you can wear those Doc Martens Mary Janes into a Hurricane, and the Hurricane is going to be the one that comes out beat up. All right. So lots of Lolitas used to hand make items with varied success, of course. Not everyone is a seamstress, and not everyone has to be a seamstress, and that's why we have custom sizing. So good materials, although handmade is great and a great way sometimes to get things for less, good materials can be pricier than buying secondhand brand or custom items, so keep that in mind. If you'd like to hand make your own items, first of all, please know how to sew. Start with some kind of rectangle skirt, and if you'd like to use patterns, which I highly recommend, rather than old tutorials from whatever corner of the internet, the Gothic Lolita Bibles had several patterns, as well as there was this Gosurori sewing book, which specialized in patterns, and Otome no Sewing is kind of a revival of that, where it's all Lolita patterns, and some of those work for old school and some of them don't. All right, so here's all my materials places. Laces.taobao.com is the go-to, and all the others are pretty nice too, I guess. So here we are at Resources and Media. If you want some entertainment and you haven't seen the film yet, Kamikaze Girls, the book, the movie, the manga, whatever, the puppet show, anything else by Takemoto Novella, they're all great ways to really get in the old school spirit of things. LolitaHistory.com, that's run by Rain Dragon, the inimitable, amazing Rain Dragon, and I believe Purest Maiden has involvement in that as well, and it's just a great resource if you ever want to spend 23 hours in a row looking at GLBs. That is your place to go. They are low quality scans, but they really give you an appreciation for how things were when you weren't paying attention, which is most of the time for me. For blogs, I have several recommendations. They're all up on my resource sheet. Rain Dragon, of course, just because she does so much for the community. Josie Micah. Rose Red Memorandum, the brand, also has their blog. Your Other Left and Cynical Neo-Princessism are old schoolers who post pretty regularly. Overall, they're all just really fun to read, even if you don't agree with them all the time. Listen to some Visual K. That's fun. Listen to some classical music too, but I don't like classical music recommendations, so I'm not going to do that to you. For anime and manga, there are a lot of options, but my favorites for old school are Paradise Kiss, Rose of Versailles, and Nana. There's the Lolita Handbook on LiveJournal. That's how I learned how to Lolita, and I turned out horribly. For YouTube channels, you can look at Cynical Neo-Princessism, Trouble in the Message Center, Pure Ray, or Embroidered Doll, and they're the ones that reliably release old school content, but everybody does old school sometimes because it's just a time in Lolita that was pretty good. It's not like you have to marry this substyle. And finally, make some friends. Please talk to older Lolitas, unless it makes them creepy. Talk to Lolitas your age who are already involved in the con. Talk to a dog. Who knows? But making friends on Lolita is the best way to feel confident in a community, to share your memories, and really to find your style and your people. So I highly recommend that. All right. I think I've talked for long enough now for me to read a little bit and talk for a little bit longer. Dogs Know Secrets. Oh, yeah. So now I'm reading the chat. Oh yeah, there are like 4 supplemental blog posts. So if anybody, I have short hair with buzz sides and I get self-conscious about rectangular headdresses looking off balance. Any tips? So there are several directions you could go. Birds will tell secrets to others. So one direction you could go is to say, F it, I am me and I love my forehead, and just go around like that. You can see now that my forehead is all naked now, and that's just fine. Another thing you could do, get a huge half bonnet, show it to the world. It'll look fine. But really, a lot of times people get stressed about balance with a lot of modern styles because they're just so poofy. But when the style isn't as poofy, you really do not need as much on top of your head. So a lot of coordinates you'll see just had no headdress at all. Another option is you could wear a full-size hat if you're wearing a Gothic or some classic coordinates, but keep in mind that the style has to work for you, not the other way around. If you feel like the style is getting on your nerves, just make it work for you. Change it around and do something that makes you happy. All right, I think I've got that down. Does anyone... Oh, frilly mop caps. Rococo Heroine on Taobao is great for frilly mop caps for a reasonable price. I'm dehydrated now. Does anyone else have any other questions? I know I kind of zoomed through this, but I really wanted to make sure that everyone has access to these materials because all the old school advice is actually from 2005, and half those shops are closed and the other half are Bodyline. Let's see, what else? So one thing I didn't talk about, and I'm not getting a question about it, so I'm going to keep talking until somebody physically stops me, is doing your laundry for old school. So people are scared of doing laundry in a variety of styles, but old school especially, because printing wasn't very refined back then. And if you have a lovely red piece like this with a lovely white apron, sooner or later you will have a lovely faded red piece with a not so lovely pink apron. So what you can do about that is try to separate your colors, use color catchers, wash in cold water, follow Avina's coffee blog. She knows everything. They know everything about OxyClean and the miracles thereof. Keep your items out of direct sunlight with good airflow. You do not need to wash everything you own every time you wear it. If you only wear it for an hour, that's fine. If you wear it for a few hours or it touches your skin, please wash it. Use a gentle detergent, again, cold water, low spin. You can use a delicate bag and then flat dry it. And especially with these cotton laces, cotton lace is very, very easy to get wrinkled up and kind of looking grody. So while you're flat drying it, you're going to want to stretch it out. And then after it's dry, please steam it, because that way it'll just look nicer in pictures and it won't get all crumpled up and worn weirdly and end up dragging in your tea at the next tea party you go to. Let's see, does anyone have any other questions? I got 9 minutes, y'all. I didn't expect that people wouldn't have as many questions. Please. All right. Let's see. Is there a difference in quality between old school and newer brand pieces? There definitely is. Apart from the typical crotchety old schooler, they use this dang polyester nowadays nonsense. There's also things like a lot of the older pieces will have things like built-in petticoats where they'll have a layer of hard tools sewn into the lining, whereas newer releases may not have lining at all, much less hard tools sewn into it. You also get less modularity in the pieces now. A lot of things are sewn on rather than removable. Like this apron is completely removable, whereas there are some newer pieces that are sewn, have aprons that are just sewn on as part of it and you can't remove them. It really depends on the brand and it depends on the specific release though. I feel like Angelic Pretty and Baby the Starshine Bright have been known to have quality control issues ever since their production switched from mainly Japan to being in China. But it's not really fair to blame a country on different things in production. Another thing with quality is you will see a lot of snags in polyester materials, but that's less quality and more because polyester is filaments rather than small staple fibers. So a snag is going to pull all the way through the garment instead of just staying in one area. In general, I feel like old school is sturdier and I prefer it, but it's not for me to say whether it's better quality or nicer than anything else. I prefer it certainly, but people have different priorities and that's just part of life. So what are my thoughts on trendy old school styles of today and how it represents what was worn back in the day? I think it's pretty creepy to be a reenactor for people who are 20 years older than you. I think it's extremely weird if people are trying to be super accurate. And I also think it's weird if people are focusing more on looking at the time period and trying to mimic individual snapshots or individual people rather than just drawing inspiration from it. I mean, I do consider myself someone who wears old school, but I'm not an old schooler. I feel like my interpretation of the fashion before it's related to a time period is related to myself. As it relates to trendy old school, I I appreciate that people are looking at black and white dresses and no longer saying that's automatically Ida. I appreciate that people see that there can be beauty in racial lace and are looking at different types of detail than just prints. But I feel like the idea of old school being a whole category or a sub-style of its own rather than just an era of time that happened is personally a little bit weird to me. I would much rather people just appreciate that they're a sweet Lolita who likes black and build their style out from there rather than focusing the entire effort on this is a period of time I'm mimicking. So my ideas are complicated and my throat is a little bit sore, so I'll leave it at that for that topic. Oh yeah, one thing with the quality question that I didn't say, I miss Velveteen. I like it. It's soft, it's shiny. It reminds me of a raccoon in the moonlight. All right. Other things. Another thing which I really didn't touch on. Okay. Meta's 3-tier frill, it depends on how you wear it. The great thing about pieces like Meta's 3-tier frill and some of their re-releases of the bouquet series that have more poof is if you wear it with a big poofy petticoat and a princess sleeve chiffon blouse, it can look perfectly modern. And if you wear it with a slimmer petticoat and a big face-eating Peter Pan collar and some form of a doily or old grandmother crochet project on your head, it can look perfectly old school. Although I touched mainly on materials and individual items, there's a lot of styling that you can do to make a piece look more versatile beyond what the piece inherently looks like. Like, even though this piece is a 2002 design re-released in 2008 and looks very old school because of that, if I were to take off this apron and these sleeves, and if I were to put some standard jewelry on here, a head bow here, and wear it with lace tights and heels, it could pass for a more modern form of classic rather than old school sweet. It's also about the mood and the style that you're trying to give off. That happens with both attitude and physical styling. So what you can do for that is, again, for old school, you're going to want to have very subtle makeup that you sweat off 10 minutes into your panel. Whereas for modern Lolita, if you add falsies and contouring and a lip color that isn't black, blue, or pink, you're probably going to look pretty modern, even if you're wearing that one Maxis Ma'am OP from 2001 that people would commit several felonies for, you know? And with hair, likewise, a ringlet wig will look old school because nobody has been brave or foolish enough to commit ringlet wigs yet for a modern Lolita, whereas if you wear a mermaid style wavy poofy wig, that'll look 2015 pretty much. It's all about knowing what you're doing. In this panel, I tried to give pretty strict guidelines as to what items were and what they looked like, but Emma, you know what you're doing, shut up. But it's just get to know your pieces, get to know your time period, and get to know yourself. That's really how you find a style within Lolita, whether it's on the old schooler side or new schooler side, or I don't know, post school 20 years from now, maybe you're the innovator. That's how you find a style that works for you. My primary style is actually around 2006, 2007 main pieces are my favorite. I really love the embroidery and I love the level of detail and care that's put into those designs. But I would say they're pretty darn unpopular because it doesn't appeal to everyone, and that's just a fact of alternative fashion. the only person you're dressing for is yourself, fam. Oh yeah, and for those platforms, since it's just about time, I'm going to give you one last tip. If you have a big pair of big, chunky, tall Mary Janes, also get a pair of cheap, short, little school uniform Mary Janes, because if you live in, say, a college campus that has brick pathways everywhere, you will fall down and you may fall into a swamp, and you don't want that happening to your brand. You want a pair of comfy old school Mary Janes, and you want a pair of aggressive old school Mary Janes, and then you can do some other things with your life. Also, rocking horseshoes. Anyway, if y'all have any questions, I am on the Discord. I am terminally online. I'm working tomorrow, so I can't do office hours. But yeah, don't fall off a platform. Enjoy old school. Get glasses because the GLB ruined your vision. And most of all, no matter what you end up doing with your fashion style, whether you end up using any of this nonsense in your style or not, just have fun with it. Alternative fashion is about expressing yourself. It's not about expressing me. I can express me just fine. Anyway, have a nice night, everyone, and thank you so much for watching.